Folks, we're honored this afternoon to interview one of the greatest engine builders ever. He's certainly at the top of my list. And not only did he build some race-winning engines, probably more at Martinsville than the rest of them put together, but Jack Tant also could build a race car that could get around the racetrack. And Jack, thank you so much for letting us come in and talk to you this afternoon.
My pleasure.
And I know that people have followed you through the years, know who you are, know your record, and know a lot about your drivers, and especially Jack Tant. And some of the things that I've always wondered and wanted to talk to you at some time when you weren't busy, but building race engine, a guy stays busy all the time. But you told me a little bit this morning about how you got started, and it was just really an interesting story. And I know the fans out there would like to know and hear that story about what got you into racing.
Well, it goes back a long way. I think maybe, I can't remember exactly what year. It was a friend of mine had a cousin in Portsmouth, I believe, and there was going to be a race up there the weekend. So he talked me into going up there, and we got together, and it was Chinese Corner, best I remember. I think Joe Weber was there, little Joe Jernigan, probably Bill Champion. And I remember walking in the gate that day that Joe Weber and Bill Champion were coming through the turns side by side, and it looked like the dirt was going over the grandstand. And I reckon right then is where I got bit with racing, and it kind of started there. Mm-hmm. So my friend worked at a grocery store that his daddy's owned, and he made a little money. He said, well, listen, I'll pay for the car if you'll build it, and that's the way it started. And believe it or not, the first car we built was a four-door. And it wasn't long before we changed up and got another one. And I think we went to Little Washington was the first race, and we had a local driver that thought he could drive. His name was C.B. Stigall. Worked over the body shop, Raz Clark, run here in town. And we went to Little Washington, and the very first thing he'd done was come through the infield and hit a telephone pole and broke the pole in two. So I think that was the end of his driving career as far as I was concerned. That's kind of how it started. But then it kind of got to rolling, and then we went from there. So
well, do you remember when you won your first race and who drove the car?
I just can't really remember for sure.
Did you ever drive?
I tried that one time, and I figured out I was better on the outside looking in than the inside looking out.
Well, you're best known for your racing engines. What was the deciding factor between building the chassis or building engines? And you actually could do it all, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, actually, that was the only way. Then we just built them, and kind of like we thought they ought to be, and trial and error. Mm-hmm.
Well, how did you get so far ahead of everybody else?
Well, that's a good question, I guess. I don't really know. I just put a lot of time in it,
right? And
I really wanted to do it the way I thought it should be done, and we had some good luck along the way. And it takes luck along with the other to make a hit on it.
Well,
and I was blessed with good drivers. My first driver was a local driver. I was telling you that C.B. Stigall, but the second driver was another local driver from Roanoke Rapids. His name was James Tillery. Now, he was, the regular guy here on the outside thinking he can drive, but he found out soon that he couldn't drive too good, because at Lawrenceville, I think the first race down there, he won a little heat race and went in the first turn, turned bottom side upwards. So I don't know if he got excited when he won the race or what. So that was kind of the end of that experiment, I'd say.
On the flathead Fords that you started with, at one point in time, you actually ran a six-cylinder Chevrolet, and you were telling me about the exhaust run out from under the fender, and I believe you were burning alcohol, and it lit up the track when they.
Well, that was really the Chevrolet.
Chevrolet, okay.
Yeah, the six-cylinder engine, basically, the only 6 cylinders I really done was for street use, not for my own use as far as racing on the track. But I did do a few 6 cylinders, you know, cams and headers and compression for guys that wanted to run them on the street, and that was about all I did. But the deal you're talking about, that was my one of the first Chevrolets I built. Okay. And a bit you couldn't buy headers to fit your chassis. I don't even remember ever buying a header for a long time. I made them, and so I just made a header to come out and dumped it right out onto the front fenders, right even with the bottom of the fender. And I put a little megaphone on it so to make it sound a little bit better.
Well, now, on the flathead Fords, you won a lot of races with flathead Fords.
Yeah,
and
we did some.
Apparently, you knew a lot about engines back in those days. And I know I've discussed with you at various times camshafts and bore strokes and so forth. Why did your flathead Fords run so much better than a lot of other people's?
Well,
we want to know.
I really, the flathead Ford, you got to remember, big is always better. So I got some strokes and bought them and made them big enough to get the job done. And that's kind of the way I done it. I didn't run them hardly stock. You know, it was 4 1/4 strokes, 3 3/8 bores, and a good camshaft. Which back in the day, I reckon I run more of the Escadurin cams.
Maybe the 404.
Yeah, 404s.
Like
yeah, that was one of the very popular ones. That was.
Well, the reason I asked that question, a lot of our racing fans love the history, and of course, stock car racing, as I knew it when I grew up, started with the flathead Ford, and there's several racing clubs today that still run the flathead Fords, and that's why I asked you the question, because there's a lot of interest, and I'm still racing them, and I always like to learn more about them, and talking to a guy like you is where you get that kind of information. And then I guess about 55, 6, the world changed with a little Chevrolet engine, and you went over to Chevrolets. And just looking around your shop here, and by the way, we're at the famous Jack Tant garage here in Littleton, North Carolina.
Right.
And it is a vast complex, and this is where a lot of all the winning engines came from for a lot of people, including Dale Earnhardt.
Yeah. Right.
Ray and Roy Hendricks, and you know, just a great lineup of drivers. Eddie Krause,
right,
Jack Bland, and on and on and on. Yeah, I'm just amazed to walk in here to this historical place, and you still come down once or twice a week. You're retired.
Yeah, I do.
But when the flathead Fords went away and the Chevrolets come on, you were on top of your game. And Martinsville, I guess, is a good example. Trenton, Langhorne, anywhere that you went, how did you do it? How did you keep that pace up, building these engines, looking after the cars, and I mean, you stayed ahead with ingenuity, inventing stuff. First 4-barrel carburetor, and on and on and on. Where'd you find time to do all this?
Well, when you love racing, you know, you just get the time to do it. You just make time to do it. And talking about the Chevrolet versus the Ford, I remember one thing that really changed my mind to a Chevrolet. I had a Street 50 model Ford that was bored and stroke, you know, 4 1/4, 3 3/8, which is 303 cubic inch. And I gotta say, I must have raced a lot of people, and I don't know that I can't remember that I ever got outrun. I got run pretty close a couple of times, and one of the times was a friend of mine over in South Hill. I think his name was Earl Wright. He had a 55 Chevrolet power pack, you know, dual exhaust, 4-barrel carburetor. So we lined up a race one night on 301, and a friend of mine got out, and he was supposed to drop the flag, which was a handkerchief. You know, he got out in the middle of the road on one night about 10, 11 o'clock on 301, and he dropped the handkerchief, and we took off. And I'm in the Ford, hopped up 50 model Ford. He was in that 55 Chevrolet. I want you to know, that 120 mile an hour he was still there side by side. And if I hadn't had a little bit more, I couldn't have done it, but I did finally pass him. And I decided right then it was the time to change engines.
Well, I guess the rest is history, but even when you went to Chevrolet and you was successful with that, I'm just looking around the shop here and I saw some stuff, and this is the kind of guy that Jack Tant was. And folks, I want you to look at that. Tell us what this is, Jack.
Well, basically, this is Strongberg carburetors, 2 barrels, and I just basically took 2 of them and done a little work on them. I didn't have a lathe or a mill or anything that time, so I took my body grinder and ground them down on the back side so I could put 2 together back to back, and welded the bases together and got the linkage to work. Bought some linkage stuff from Honest Charlie and made a 4-barrel Strongberg alky burning carburetor.
And this went on the Chevrolet.
And this went on the Chevrolet.
And this was the adapter plate.
That was my adapter plate for adapting it to a stock Chevrolet intake manifold.
And the fuel log.
That was the fuel log that I had connected to, best I remember, 2 Strongbergs to begin with, and that wasn't quite enough for alky, so I added 2 more, which made 4. And that's what Eddie Krause drove a lot then at Lawrenceville.
Well, what did he think about that when you put it on the car and went and tried it out?
It was really fantastic. It really was, because the guys were trying to fool with the old Rochester carburetors, and they wouldn't run through the turns. And when I come there with that, there was no question, just a matter of getting out there and getting it done, and had a lot of success with that.
Did you have any trouble jetting it or anything?
No, he just more or less kind of doubled the numbers from gas to alky. I think I run 95s to 105s.
See down in that?
Yeah, that's how much jet it took.
Lord have mercy.
I had to build some extra reservoirs because they didn't hold enough alky to run through the turns good. So I built a little extra container that hooked up
to the side of
each
the
bowl, and that gave it enough fuel to get through the corner like it should.
And these are 81 carburetors?
No, they're 48s.
48s?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it did the job, and of course later on Holly had a 4-barrel for everybody to run, but I guess that's probably one of the first 4-barrels, isn't it?
That's probably one of the first 4-barrels, yeah.
And this stuff like that you kept on inventing and playing with and perfected the little Chevrolet engine. And I remember one or some years there that you had that Chevelle, you and Clayton Mitchell, and I'm still in awe of the way that car went around the racetrack. And what you had done to the chassis. That was back in the 70s, and today they've caught up with that, but you were way ahead of your time on chassis stuff.
Clayton was a really smart guy. He really concentrated on handling, and he was the kind of guy, he didn't have to look at a car but about 3 laps before he could tell what to do to it. He was just really, really smart on chassis. And I guess that made the best combination, because the chassis work, I could do it, but he really loved to do it, so he kind of took over the chassis when we went together. I think it was probably 66, probably.
And he was a welder. He just used to go by here.
He was a welder by trade, yeah, but he was really smart on chassis and suspension. He really liked to do it, and he was good at doing it.
Had he been working on race cars before we met you?
Not really. Not that I know of. We just kind of met kind of. He used to work at the dam when I was at the old shop. He would come by there, they'd get off early, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the evening, and he'd come by there and there'd be a race car sitting out in front of my shop, and he finally stopped, and that's how we got together. And it turned out to be a real good combination together, because kind of hard to do chassis work, do engine work, and keep them up. So he took a big load off of me when we come together. He kind of done the chassis and I done the engine in, and it kind of blended pretty good. Not to say that we didn't get in a few misunderstandings or arguments, you might want to call it, at the racetrack a couple of times, but that's just racing, because I'd want to do a little bit different than he did, but in the end, we blended real good.
I still remember at Caraway, I guess back in the mid-'70s, y'all came down, got there late. He started in the rear. Ray Hendricks did, started in the rear. And he passed, I think there was 19 late model sportsmen there, and he passed every one of them on the outside going into turns and coming off the turns and won the race. That's when Joe Milliken and some others down there run pretty good, Jimmy Hensley, Jay Hitchcock, and won the race. I guess it was a 50-lap race. And I'd never seen anybody do that at Caraway before. And I was in awe. And then 30, 40 years later, I found out what y'all done to the rear end. Tell us what you done to that right rear arm over here.
I'm telling you, Clayton could come up with some trick stuff now. I mean, when you get down to it, you got to give him the credit for doing that, because he didn't mind trying it. That's one thing. I was the kind of guy, I'd try it, but I had to have it where I could go back to the original baseline before I got too far out on the limb. As you know, the old Chevrolet had the trailing arms, the two truck arms. That's what we run on them.
Right.
They come back and put the coils over the housing, and they were hooked together at the front. Well, the old deal, we used to have to cock the rear ends to get through the corner good to make them tight coming off. But think about it, when you got the rear end cocked too much, you'd want to push the front. So you had a situation that you had to balance out. And we did that. But the way this worked, Mitch decided, well, he's going to do it a little bit different. So we slided the right trailing arm, put a stop, automatic stop. We could control how much it could go forward and how much it could go backwards. So when you run down in the corner real hard and you put on the brake, what's going to happen? You got that arm slotted. That rim will cut to the outside, actually cocking to the outside. It makes the car turn. You won't push like that. So when you give it the gas, what's going to happen? It's going to go like this. Tightens it up coming off.
You had rear steer, didn't you?
Had rear steer. We had that, these guys just started that with the Cup cars, and NASCAR kind of knocked that out, because that was a little bit, the cars looked like they wanted a dog walk coming down the straightaway.
Well, that's just how far ahead these guys were.
But Mitch could come up with that stuff, and we made it work.
I know you had some fun times too with Eddie Krause, I believe it was. Had a little drinking problem one day at the track. You were telling earlier.
Yeah, Eddie was a comical kind of guy. One night at South Boston, he got in a situation that he ended up slamming the wall pretty hard. And the first thing he said when he got out is, "Hello, wall." That was a song back then, "Hello, wall."
Yeah. He won a lot of races for you. I was looking at your pictures.
He did.
I'm not going to ask you who your favorite driver was. I know you liked them all, and they were all great drivers and great guys, and meant a lot to your career, and you meant a lot to their career. But the Hendricks guy always stuck in my mind as being one of the greatest short track drivers I ever witnessed.
Right.
He could do unbelievable things.
And really, you got that goes in, because the best race car in the world is not going to do it if you don't have a good driver. But Ray was the kind of guy that could drive it. If it was a little bit off, he could make up for it. It didn't have to be dead on for him to win with it. But when you got the car dead on, it was really, sure enough, he was gone. But lots of times he had to make up for some deal that you don't get the car exactly right in time for the race. And I can remember one race at Trenton. It was one of those deals that we didn't really get the car dead on. And him and Merv Trackler run side by side and nose to tail there for a big part of the race. And that car that Merv was driving, you couldn't draft it. But when Merv was behind Ray, he could draft the Camaro, which was at the time we were running the Camaro. So when it swapped and Ray got behind him, that car that Merv was driving, it didn't draft too good. So at the end of that race, he found ended up winning that race because he just outdone Merv through the turns. He just held on to it. But his wrist was swollen up twice as big as it should be when he got through that race that day. I'll never
Definitely manhandling the race car.
That's how he just manhandled it. If it didn't do right, he could make up for it.
He was a man.
Yeah, he was.
And his wife was always with him on top of the camper watching him. I remember that.
Right.
And I admired him so much, especially that Caraway race I alluded to a minute ago. And then he had a son, Roy, was a good driver too.
Yeah.
Did Roy ever drive any of your engines and
No,
stuff?
well, he might have drove some of my engines at one time, but he never drove for me. But he did. Roy run pretty good at one time when he had a sponsor behind him. But then for some reason or other, he quit driving. I think he got someone to drive for him. He still races a little bit now.
Well, and others that drove for you, are these guys still around, some of them? Do you communicate with them, ever talk to them and reminisce back in the old days of?
Haven't for a long time. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've talked to anybody. I know Ted's still around. I've got to somehow never find time to go up there and see him. I think he's doing pretty good.
Now, you were telling me earlier that they're restoring a car, the Flying 11 car, one of them?
Yeah, Rick Hendrick has a coupe that he bought from Stuart, what was his name up there?
You talking about Stuart House?
Stuart, I can't remember. He was in Martinville somewhere up that way, Stuart. Anyway, he built a car that was similar to the Lim. I think Rick bought that car and is changing it over to be exactly like the Lim. Suspension, torsion bar suspension front and springs rear. And Frank Edwards is doing that now, and it's just about got it complete, and I have the engine ready to go in it, fuel injection that's supposed to go in it, and that's going to happen this summer sometime.
And you're going to get to bring it over here to the shop?
Hopefully we'll get it in the parade here, or the downtown turnaround, they call it. They have a car show, and it's usually about 150, 200 cars at that thing, and so we're looking forward to doing that if time permits that we get it ready in time. And I think we will get it ready in time. It's about 95% complete now.
And looking around your shop, you're telling me this used to be a Chevrolet dealership back in the early 1900s.
This was a Chevrolet dealer back in the mid-20s.
And it's spacious, and you section it off with a dyno room, assembly room, and then a machine room. And you're telling me, as you did a lot of work for people up north, and the word spread about Jack Tant engines, and you began to build and more of them. Tell me a little bit about how that transpired, and how you went about doing that.
Well, back in the time you're talking about, we used to go to the big races up north at the end of the year, and like Langhorne, Trenton, Oswego, the big races would come at the end of the year, so we would make that trip north, and we had real good luck up there, and we won some of them. And doing that, it turned into people calling me, wanting me to do engines, and so I did do some and sent them up there, and they could win with them, and that's how that northern engine business started. And at one time, I was doing quite a few engines. I had about 4 or 5 guys in here at one time. Doing the 90s. I raced in the early 90s to the late 90s. In the early, I reckon I probably slowed down some in '03. And then a little bit later on, I just decided it was time to maybe quit. So
Isn't this where Lula Rosa started, right here?
Yeah, Lula Rosso come here for a while. He did work for me some. And Lou was real good. And I met Lou down at, used to go to Daytona in February, and he was working for Smokey Unique. So that's where I met Lou at. So it ended up later on that after he quit and went to 2 or 3 places, he did, while he was waiting for a job to come available, he called me and wanted to work some, and I put in the work, and he turned out real good for me. He really did.
Well, like many racers, he was dedicated, just like you were. You had to be awful dedicated. I know your wife said that if she was going to ever see you, she had to learn to like racing, start going to races and enjoy racing. You were dedicated, but I can't believe that everybody in racing knew who Jack Tant was. And I think I told you a story about this guy down in Florida, Speedy Spears, an engine builder and car builder, similar to what you do. And your careers are very similar. His driver told him they was going to go to Columbia Speedway, and his driver said, there ain't no need to go to Columbia this weekend. And Speedy said, well, why not? And he said, well, there's going to be a car there with a Jack Tant engine in it. But, you know, that speaks volumes to the reputation that Jack Tant had. And this truck I was looking at this morning, I've seen it, I think it's South Boston, Virginia. You bought this truck back in '51.
Bought it in '51 from Boyd Boyce Motor in Warrington.
And that's got a lot of history.
It's got a lot of history, yeah.
It's been
my
around.
tow truck for, I think, like 21 years on the road, towing with that truck.
What do you think about racing today compared to what and when you were involved in it?
Well, that's kind of a hard question. You know, when you actually don't have a driver and a car in the race, your interest kind of dies down. So, and I guess that's what's happened to me. I do look at them some, you know, especially, and I go to Richmond in the spring and the fall to see the races up there. It's really got high tech, so you got to be willing to really go out on a limb when you try some of the stuff that they're doing now.
But you still think about things you could do
I
and
still
invent.
think about it, yeah. And some of that stuff they were doing and still are. Because a racer is a racer and he's going to try everything he can.
It's what he lives for, isn't it?
That's right.
And that's what you, Jack Tant, lived for, wasn't it? To run faster. And
But when we run, Bill, the rules weren't quite as strict. Of course, they inspected the cars, and you had to, you know, things that had to be right on them, and we tried to keep as straight as we could. But the rules, I think, have got real, I think, too micromanaged to really make the racing as interesting as it used to be. I think you got to give the guys, let them do some of the things they like to do, and it's going to get a lot more interesting.
You couldn't have come up with this 4-barrel carburetor today, you know.
Probably couldn't.
Well, they started out with a paragraph and ended up with a book, didn't they? Several volumes is what they did. Well, do you still watch it on the weekends?
Yeah,
racing?
I do. I watch some of it, yeah.
Well, you know, the difference to me is back in the day when the race is over, you go to planning for the next race.
Yeah, that's right.
And running through your mind. Now when the race is over, I go get me something to drink and think about something else, you know. And I guess your wife is pleased that you're retired, no longer racing, and spend time with her and good Bill, family time.
By the way, you know, your dad was a big racer back in the day. Had a lot of success, and I followed him some.
Well, thank you. I still admire my daddy and think about him every day. I learned a way to make a living from him, really.
And what I do now, I got an iPad, and I get on there and I look at the old race cars. That's what I find most interesting in the old days. Got a lot of that on there.
I look at the old race cars, and I look at what they got today, and sometimes I just think to myself, these guys today wouldn't get out of an electric chair to get in one of them old cars. Think about it. Well, Jack, thank you so much for your time, and I mean, we appreciate it, and people who like old racing, I know that they still think about you, still admire you, and you're recognized as being the tops, man, I'm going to tell you. And I am really proud that I know you and a friend of mine. But I thank you so much for allowing me to come down here and talk to you and spend some quality time with you. I definitely want you to know I appreciate it, man.
My pleasure, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
An old Ford running on a red dirt road. The stars are bright and the moon is low. A revenue man coming up behind.